Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you come back. For the people that attended our first two summit presentations, and for the people that hadn't, welcome. We have a great presentation today. The Society of Collision Repair Specialists. You can see how important it is to have interactions like this with keynote speakers and the panel that we've accumulated. It gives you interactions to be able to ask questions and understand the vehicle technologies that we're all dealing with today. So just an awesome event. I love seeing the full seats out there and the collision people that have attended. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Without them, none of this really would be possible. So next up, John Ellis with Ellis of Associates. I'd like to introduce. Good guy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Las Vegas. How are we? All right, awake now. Excellent. So who was here last year for the last session of the day? All right. For those of you that were here, remember? Country roads. All right? Okay, all right. For the last couple of years, I've had the pleasure of moderating this end-of-day panel. And we've discussed all sorts of things. We've discussed the digitalization of the car. We've discussed why, and we've discussed the impact. The why, 40,100 people. 40,100 people lost their lives year-end last year in vehicles that we maintain. 1.3 million people lost their lives around the world. And the automotive community takes very seriously the mandate for safety. And each and every year, engineers in Dearborn, Cologne, Munich, Tokyo, Seoul, around the world, put their heads together and say, how do we make the car safer? How do we protect those inside? And for years, that has resulted in an increase in what we see in terms of sensors. 2018, highest end model vehicle, over 120 such sensors and computers. And then, about 2 to 3 years ago, we started asking ourselves, can we do something to avoid accidents? And thus began a journey to connectivity. And so today, when you see a car, a modern day car, in the last couple of years, it will have something called a modem. Modem, for those of you not initiated into radio, a modem is a piece of equipment that communicates wirelessly. You can think of it just like your cell phone. Your body is the car, your phone is the modem, and you communicate to the outside world. And cars have modems in them. It's estimated that by 2022, all cars sold in the United States of America will be equipped with a modem. And we call that which goes over the modem telematics. And so the question that gets asked, we've answered over the last couple of years, is how do I start repairing these newfangled things? What do I do? What happens? What do I do with these sensors? How do I handle this? We looked at tooling. We looked at third-party companies. We looked at being an independent repairer. What do you need to worry about? And in this ongoing continuation of our education, today we're answering the question, so what is telematics? Really, besides a fancy term. What does it mean to the auto industry? What does it mean to the repair industry? What does it mean to the insurance industry? What does it mean to consumers? Those are all heavy-duty questions. We're hoping that today's panel discussion will be able to walk us through and guide us through that conversation in as much fun as we had last year for those of you that were in our audience. I promised at least one song of a refrain because I think we're going to get some really good debate and discussion happening here today. But I can't do this alone. I am joined, as always, by a panel of experts that we've spent time to curate and bring on the stage with you. For those of you who see me do this before, you know I have some simple rules. To make this fun, to make this engaging, I don't script our conversation. What you're about to see today on this stage is a completely unscripted conversation. In full transparency, we've had a single phone call where everyone could introduce themselves and where everyone could establish their guardrails for the company that they represent as to what was considered in play for conversation or out of play. Outside of that, none of them know the questions that they're going to get asked. And so that means I need you to do me something. As with years past, I need you to respect the fact that our panelists don't know what they can or can't say until the question's asked. As your moderator and as their protector, if a question comes that I deem to be outside the guardrails, I'm going to put it aside. So if a question comes and it's outside the guardrails, I'm going to put it aside. So if your question's not asked, maybe you ask it in a different way. Or I might say, hey, the question here, this is outside guardrails, please rephrase it. Okay? That's how we get such a great conversation. Is that cool? Do I get a round of applause? Is that good? Are we good with that? Unscripted? All right, good. So with that then, if I could please start having my panelists walking up, and if you could please give a round of applause. First up, Andreas Hecht from CCC Information Systems. Derik Reiser from Enterprise Holdings. Jim Lewandowski from Verisk. And Nikki Rydell, Subaru of America. All they know are your names, and all they can see are your companies. Why don't you start, Andreas, and we'll title and a little bit about what CCC Information does, for those that may not know, and then a little bit more about what you specifically do, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Andreas Hecht. I am responsible for the OEM vertical, the OEM market at CCC. I kind of just got a show of hands who here knows CCC or okay. So we're essentially a software as a service provider that connects insurance companies with collision repair facilities, with car makers, with a variety of ecosystem partners, rental car companies being another example. So we essentially lay down the pipes that connect all these agents in the ecosystem, and as you might imagine, it's all connected through a single cloud. And telematics is the newest entrant into that cloud. So we do quite a bit on the telematics front. So my team essentially works with the car manufacturers day in, day out around different initiatives, anything from data, parts initiatives, analytics, insights, as well as telematics programs that we operate between insurers and the car companies.
Excellent, thank you. Derik.
Derik Reiser, Enterprise Holdings, so you probably know us best as Enterprise National and Alamo Rental Car. We've got one of the largest fleets of vehicles in the world, so obviously fleet management becomes a day-to-day thing for us to deal with, which has led to my role at Enterprise over the last 6 years or so, digging into telematics, what the potential and the capabilities are with that technology and how we could use it to do what we do better. And as we grow into a total transportation company, going beyond the kinds of services that we provide to you and your customers, as we explore those and we explore the evolution of the vehicle itself and new mobility services, there's a pretty bright future ahead.
Excellent, thank you. Jim.
Sure. Jim Lewandowski. I'm from Verisk. And Verisk is kind of a unique organization in that, we have worked with the insurance industry for many, many years. We were actually formed by the insurance industry back in 1971. And one of the things that we do, because the insurance industry uses so much data in terms of being able to analyze their policies and their markets and make sure that their pricing is adequate and so on and so forth. We collect vast amounts of data from multiple sources, and we provide analytics back to insurers to help them manage their business. I work in the telematics IoT unit, and obviously there's a huge amount of data now coming out of the telematics area. and in particular from connected cars. And I think, John alluded to this in his introduction about, the fact that, within the space of a few years, virtually all cars shipped and sold in the United States will be connected cars. They'll have a modem, a SIM card, and they'll be transmitting data wirelessly. And so what we are looking to do, Verisk, is to help put this information together to help all of the people in the ecosystem, the automakers, the car owners, the repair shops, the insurers, to make better decisions in their space. So that's really, part of our mission and why we're very deeply involved in the telematics IoT space.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining. Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nicole Rydell. I'm from Subaru of America. I have recently started working on the certified collision network that was launched with our retailers in June. Soon, we should be able to announce an independent launch, and in the meantime, I'm working with all of these guys to make sure it's the best network that you guys are all working with. We have a telematics group that has been working really hard on our Subaru Starlink initiative, and we're working together quite regularly to see how we can integrate the Starlink's telematics to certified repair to ensure the safest, most proper repair, but also to make sure that our customers feel the love, the Subaru love in their darkest hours when they've been in a horrible crash. It's terrifying to them, and we want to be there for them to make sure that they have the help and guidance that they need to get their car fixed to the way that they found it when they bought it. So it's really an important initiative for Subaru because we need to be with our customers through the lifetime of their product. And our number one concern is safe and proper repair so that we know that through the fruition of them experiencing the Subaru brand, they have a consistent experience every time.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining. As Kai mentioned directly and explicitly, this only works and is only interesting to you if you get to ask questions. So you have question cards that are on your chair. Please start filling them out, raising your hands, and Kai and Aaron will come along and start asking questions. Meanwhile, I do have questions, and I will start here. So let's start from the beginning. Subaru, to the extent that you can share, how do you believe the forecast that's actually out that says by 2022, all cars, North America, would be connected, meaning from a 2022 model year and beyond that we will only be selling or buying or dealing with connected vehicles?
Right, so obviously I could only speak for Subaru. I don't know what other OEs are planning or have in the mix, but I think that might be a realistic target. I know that we have a dedicated team that is working really hard to make sure that we can get our cars as safe as possible. For example, our new Ascent, which is a 7-passenger, our largest family vehicle, eyesight is standard. We felt that because we know that children are likely to be in the car and families may be taking road trips and whatnot, that it was really important that we fit our ADAS system in from base. So we are definitely focusing on getting as much safety and security into our cars as possible. We're known for our safety, and telematics is just an extension of that safety message for Subaru. So 2022 is right around the corner, but I think if we can do it, that would be a great goal.
Fantastic. Okay, Subaru, yes, check the box.
I hope so, as much as you all hope so.
See, I can have this conversation. You all can't. Yeah, no, yes. All right, no, good. All right, well, so then that actually does bring up a really interesting question on the fleet side. And we briefly kind of spoke about it as we were establishing guardrails, but what does the construct of a completely connected fleet, what does that do for you guys in terms of fleet management?
Well, it would be huge. I mean, the potential is phenomenal. The trick is getting there. But if you could start to manage your fleet differently, if you start to have more awareness of the health of your fleet, if you have more awareness in the, even just things like the mileage and the fuel levels, you can start to operate in a much more automated fashion in terms of planning for your routine maintenance and service. Other pieces of data, you can have more predictive elements. I mean, so these are all the promises that the technology can provide, and which should lead to less mechanical downtime, better planning of maintenance and services, and then the kinds of services we could provide and experiences we could provide to our customers would be fantastic. Because if you don't have to eyeball a dashboard to look at the mileage level and the fuel level, then we can really streamline the process. But until all the cars can tell us what their status is, it's very difficult to start to change and realize that future potential.
So this is actually a question for both, continuing with you, Derik. This is a question both for you and for Nikki. And so assuming that we actually do get the cars instrumented to the point where they can share some what we'll call complex data, do you envision, because you guys do repair, you guys stipulate repair, do you envision an ability for an OEM to say, or for you as a shop to begin to choose as just best practice, something along the following? Hey, if the change in X is greater than this, then we'll do this repair versus we won't do this repair. Or if it's greater than X, then go check these other. Like, we can begin to dynamically assess a situation such that repairers are really going to have to look at this and say, wait a minute, every car, every repair is not stock anymore. It's truly the car is telling me what to look at. Do you see that and see us moving to something that complex?
I eventually, yes, it might be like George Jetson who gets to do that, but
Okay.
I think, yes, the sensors are very expensive, and we don't want to over-censor things so much that we're now, everything's a total loss because it's just too expensive to fix anything. So I don't think that's in the near future, but it would make sense. For now, we really believe in pre and post scanning so that you get all of the DTC codes right away, so you know everything that's happening. And I would even say that even after an accident, between taking the vehicle from the accident, putting it on a tow truck, and taking it to the repair facility, you still might want to scan that so that you know exactly, did something shuffle in transit. So short term, please pre and post scan.
Well, actually, that raises up a really interesting question. I know you didn't participate last year or even the year before, but scanning is obviously a huge issue as we talk through insurance and whatnot. To clarify what I just heard, are you possibly suggesting that it may be good practice to scan at site of incident before transport?
Well, I would think that the telematics that's probably when
Okay.
when it would take the scan. I would imagine that some kind of sensor impact would trigger that, and then you would get that scan. But it's so far off from the future, I'm not sure what that would actually look like.
Okay. So we talked about, that's maybe an OEM, but what about running a fleet, having to do management, right? Now beginning to build products. Do you see something like that in your future?
Well, that's where that potential is. If, your decisions are only as good as the information you have to input into that decision. If we can get more data and information about the health of a vehicle directly from the vehicle, then we're going to be all that better informed about what the appropriate steps are with that vehicle in a repair situation or in just a routine maintenance situation. So the promise is fantastic. I think it's kind of like what Nikki is saying, is it's going to take us a while to get there.
Okay. So this is a question, it's directed at the question card to Verisk. I think actually, Andreas, this is going to be something for you to weigh in on as well. So the question, I'm going to summarize. It's very well written, but it's a long question. Question is, in modern day cars, we have all sorts of parts that are not necessarily OEM parts. And so if we talk about information coming from the vehicle, what is the state of affairs where we have parts that, while qualified, are not OEM certified, may not necessarily communicate or be aware or be able to communicate the data that we're talking about, right? Again, this is data third. Right. Where are we in terms of Verisk being able to say, I have a view of the car that is complete and total, that is not dependent on, or a caveat that says, but if it's a third-party part, I've missed that.
Yeah, so I don't think we're, and this sort of follows on to some of what Nikki said, I mean, we're not at the point yet where we have a full view of the event. And so therefore, I mean, having a view of what the individual parts of the car are that have been compromised and need to be repaired, I mean, I think we're a ways away from that. Right now, it's sort of baby steps. But when you think about it, I mean, in today's environment, when a collision occurs, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's a very reactive process, right? I mean, you have to notify someone, you have to phone, the emergency response, you have to inform your insurance company. And so what I think is going to happen over time is you're going to see this sort of, a gradual incline where, in the initial phase, the car says, hey, I've been in an event, somebody could have been hurt, I need a response. And then that has a cascading effect, throughout the ecosystem, down to the point where potentially the car sends comprehensive diagnostic information where almost immediately after the event exactly what happened and what needs to be done following that event. But we're not there yet. I mean, we're quite a ways away from that.
Any additional comments, Andreas?
Yeah, so first, in terms of what we're seeing in terms of data being available, I agree in terms of the timeline that we talked about. I think what we're finding is, to the extent data is already available today, I sort of tend to think of different buckets. So there's you essentially these cars that are on the roads today, that are being sold today, they're including data sets that were designed years ago, not necessarily having all the use cases in mind that are out there that exist for this data today. So we oftentimes find ourselves in a situation of sort of back to the drawing board. Okay, we found out that the frequency with which the data is collected or sent, the types of data, the attributes, that they're incomplete. So we're working, so this is an iterative process as everything, speccing that. What we are finding, I think there are some programs that we see in the market today already that we support today. They can be either coming through telematics data from a vehicle, or even through dongle solutions or other means. If you're and that allow us to make certain determinations about what happened to that vehicle, what happened to the occupants of the vehicle. So just for, as a quick background, so we've processed almost 200 million claims in the past, so we have a lot of sort of data that allow us to sort of create an assertion based on things like, if we can get data from the bus or from a dongle about the delta V, the primary direction of force, we can actually have a pretty good idea of what happened to that vehicle. We analyze that day in, day out today. We have a casualty side of our house, so we have a pretty good idea of what happened to the occupants of the vehicle. So I don't think it's, in terms of the time frame, 2022, 2023, this is all going to take time. It's going to take a long time. Even modems that are becoming available now, connected cars, it's all great, but oftentimes lacking data. But we can do significant things today already. It's just on a smaller scale, and it'll iterate up to much higher volumes over time.
Okay, so this I did not really direct it. It's actually, I guess, to everybody. So everyone listen up. What do customers, so those people who buy the cars, think about electronic notice of loss notification that is sent to OEMs and insurers? Do they like it? Do they take action on a claim at the scene? Anyone want to take a first stab at offering an opinion or an insight?
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
The Subaru customer has been really engaged with Starlink in general. The take rate has been fantastic for us. We have not started first notification of loss or anything like that in our telematics now. Right now, we just have someone come over and say, are you okay? We saw an airbag deployed. Do you need emergency services? And they say yes or no. They can call a loved one. They can call their insurance carrier, whomever they want. We'll help them with that. Subaru owners tend to buy based on safety and trust. And we see this as an extension of that. And I think for the most part, it's something that they would be open to. And what was the second part of the question?
Well, basically, do they actually action a claim right then? So they take advantage of trying to settle an insurance claim right then and there, or start an insurance claim?
Currently we don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think that key word is trust.
Yeah.
I think really, as we're looking at these kinds of opportunities and what we do with data and how we begin to trigger events, I think all of our customers are going to want to have some sense of who is managing that, where is the data going, and what impact downstream that may have to me beneficially or not. And so I think it's up to all of us to build the right kind of trust environment, and give them the ability, in some cases, maybe to opt out of how some data is used, but have some control from an ownership standpoint.
So you're touching on a lot of things we're going to get to. I want to let you go, but help me. Has anyone ever said, "Ooh, that's scary that you knew that an airbag deployed and you called into my car to check on me"? Does anyone?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of people who opt out of the service entirely because they don't want Big Brother, or they don't want to be tracked, or they don't know. Today we say we're not doing anything with the data, but what are we going to do 5 years from now? We have no data storage. We're not tracking anyone. But if it's up to the customer and they truly want to opt out, then it's radio silence from their vehicle.
Okay. Right.
No, yeah, no, I mean, I think there are a number of important themes here. I mean, the one being trust. But I would also, I think, the component of that is also transparency. And, what we're seeing, what Verisk is seeing with our OEM partners is it's really important for there to be informed consent coming from the consumer and transparency. They know what they're being asked to do, and, you're getting their permission. And actually, we are piloting a first notice of loss, service with some of our partners, whereby if there is, an ACN notification, and the OEM partner calls into the car, the consumer will be offered the opportunity to file a claim with their insurer. And our initial research suggests that that's, overall very positively viewed. Again, it's because it's being offered, and the consumer's in control. So I think that's the important part. It's the trust and the transparency.
Go ahead, Andreas.
Yeah, just I think what we're seeing, all the data issues set aside, and that is a topic that is getting more and more complex, unfortunately. So we spend about as much time, I think, working legal angles than we work on the engineering. But we do see we operate some programs with insurers that involve, these are primarily sort of, I would say, dongle-based programs. They're not always, full, embedded programs. And what we're seeing is actually consumers being pleasantly surprised for somebody to proactively reach out to them and care for their well-being. And then you sort of, depending on obviously what, how injured the person is and all that, but, that there will be different mindsets. But I think we're going to see the convenience factor of, hey, I have somebody who's taking care of this. It could be the car company, it could be the insurance company, to really take care of this whole paperwork of filing the claim, of eliminating a bunch of the phone calls. I think I think it's gonna, over time, it's gonna find widespread adoption. But again, it's all these things. It's very early days, but so far we're actually seeing quite we've seen consumers very pleasantly surprised by the outreach.
So, by the way, please keep your questions coming. They're fantastic. And I have 4 cards that there's so many. They're all around privacy, data ownership, and what's not. So I'm going to hold them here for a long period of time. I'm going to take them maybe one by one. But first question up is, who owns the data? So that is one of the most, that question is coming everywhere, right? That's in this panel, that's in other panels, that's in the AV Summit. For all of us who spend time on the circuit, it's everywhere. So the question is, who owns the data? Now, there are some questions in here that said, who owns, is it the OE, is it insurance, is it the consumer? Who owns the data at crash? Feel free to expand at any level. as you see fit. And why don't we start with you, Nikki? Who owns the data?
That's the million-dollar question. I'm not in the telematics department, so I can't say specifically for Subaru who owns it. I do know that our owner's privacy is very, very important. We have a very pragmatic and very fact-based kind of demographic where they want to know the answer to that question immediately. So it's something that we take really seriously, especially in a matter of a crash or something like that. Who does it go to? Who sees it? Do they have the right to say, don't show it to anyone? That's all the kind of thing that the telematics team, like Andreas said, lots and lots of meetings about how we can do the right thing by our customer and make sure that, their needs and they're being taken care of first. So
very much a customer-centric, customer-first approach.
yes, that said, I'm not sure exactly what the legal stipulation from Subaru is on that.
Okay, fair enough. Next up, come on. Who owns? Any one of you? I'm like all three of you.
Sure,
Yeah. Jump in.
I'll take a stab.
Okay.
So I guess I would separate this. I mean, there's sort of the legal decision about who owns it, and I mean, I think I would leave that to the attorneys and the regulators and whatnot, because eventually it's going to have to be hashed out. But what I see, with our partners and also with Verisk is we take a customer-first approach. I mean, the consumer, we treat the data as if the consumer owns it, period. And so this is why, we've got very stringent practices around opt-in, opt-out, consumer consent, a transparency of the consent. And we also manage the data as if it's subject to all federal and state privacy rules and regulations. So, we're very, very, very careful with the data, and we treat it all the time as if the consumer owns his or her data, regardless of what the lawyers and the regulators ultimately may say.
Is that a clap? Go ahead. You can clap. That's fine. There you go. Clap. All right, go ahead.
Not that much to add. I think, so anecdote, I personally believe that it's the consumer owns the data. And I think that's sort of the foundation of, pretty much any theory you can read up on out there. So now the data, there's certain rights to the data, and that, it's actually, there's no, an insurer owns it, a car company owns it. Frankly, it gets really, really complex as you sort of work through the opt-in process. You work through the contracts that exist between insurers and their counterparts, the OEs. So there's actually, so you can imagine, for instance, if a Subaru owner or a car owner gets in an accident, the car company, it's a telematics-enabled car. You can reach out to the customer, you could walk them through, you can help them out, right? You can collect some data, you can ask them to collect some data on your behalf, and you can actually, the car company could ask them to file a claim. So the mechanics of that, essentially, what happens is then the rights to the data is between the insurer and the car company. Essentially, it travels, from one party to another. So it's very complex. But I think at heart lies the theory that you have to protect the customer, the consumer. And when you read about things like the European GDPR, Data Protection Act, the California regulation that is going to be enacted as of 2020, which follows similar paths, that's only going to get harder and harder. I mean, and ultimately, it's from a consumer perspective, this is a really good thing.
So for those who did not understand GDPR, raise a hand. Oh no, I won't. GDPR, General Data Privacy Regulation. It was instituted by Europe, pan-Europe wide. It came into effect on May 25th. And it basically states that every company that operates in and around Europe must make available to all customers the ability to get your data, understand your data, and delete your data. And it does impact U.S. companies because a lot of U.S. companies operate in Europe.
Not only that, but it protects, and this goes back to the consumer, it protects the consumer. So if a European consumer travels to America and I don't know. I was going to mention, maybe
No,
I should
yeah,
mention
no,
renting
no,
a car.
well,
but,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It actually, it
happens.
travels with, it travels with the consumer, right? So it's really important to understand. That's why it has had such a massive impact in the United States. So you probably, I don't know when it went into effect, I forget.
May
earlier this
25th.
year. Yeah, you probably saw your inbox cluttered with a whole bunch of messages from different websites and services telling you to accept here because we've changed our policy. That was the reaction to that.
Yeah.
So what I would add to it is, so there's the ownership piece of it, but I think something we have to be careful of is the control aspect of it. So, I think there's a lot of folks, in support of that the owner of the vehicle owns the data. But I think what we see in practice in some cases is trying to, kind of just then extract those rights and control of that as it flows through networks, as it flows through whatever kind of ecosystems that evolve here. And, that control could really stymie the potential for all of us in realizing the benefits of what this great technology could provide. And it also could then thwart the wishes, in some cases, of the quote-unquote owner of the vehicle and the data, depending on how that's handled. So I think we need to be careful not to just talk about ownership, but the stewards of the data have some responsibility to uphold those wishes and to be careful on how it's controlled.
Do you want to try and spend a little bit more time on the comment you made about the fact that it's the control piece that is sometimes subject to, you had some interesting language that says we should focus on control because it is there that, were you talking about the stewards of data as the control resting away from the consumer? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, I think we see it in our everyday lives with the cell phone, with our apps and the data that's collected with our apps as well. And, I think we recently, over the last couple of years, we've all become a little bit more aware of how that can be abused. And, how data is extracted without our knowledge or full understanding of what's being done with it and who controls that and who decides how it's used. And I think those are the issues that I think we need to get in front of in the automotive industry as well.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so keep them coming. These are fantastic questions. You all touched on it, but I think it does, of this last set of questions, it does weigh heavily, especially given most recently, the last couple of months, we've seen behaviors that have maybe been inconsistent with the desire of consumers. And so, very specifically, each panelist is asked to, from their perspective, how do we in this industry ensure, protect the information, the data that we receive from the vehicle at any given time, and ensure that the customer or the consumer is never put in a position where we as corporate interests begin to sell that data for benefit. Driving behavior data, whatever it might be, insurance company, repair, crash, it doesn't matter. How do we ensure that corporate interests don't subvert the privacy concerns that our consumers have?
Well, I think it's focusing on the true value to the customer for us. What really adds value, what allows us to deliver a service better, what helps us fulfill our promise to the customer. And if we stay focused on that versus trying to be opportunistic about monetizing other elements of it, I think that helps true us up to what really is value. And hopefully the industry as a whole will focus on value rather than, exploring weird business model opportunities that are exploiting the data and the customers. So staying true to what really provides value, I think, is key.
Andreas or Jimmy, want to weigh in?
Yeah, my view is that it's, I think we're still seeing today that there's still significant weaknesses in the security of the data. I think everyone is approaching it with good intentions, obviously, and frankly, things like the new GDPR law we talked about that's going to have very, very steep fines if you don't handle the data appropriately or don't report breaches or anything like that. But when I sort of scan, when I'm just looking at this industry, you read in the paper that I forget what brand a car it was, but it was a connected car, and the owner sold the car, and was surprised to find that months later they were still able to log into the portal and figure out and see where that car was with its new owner. So that's just sort of one example of there's still, it's not necessarily an ill intent. It was perhaps not thought through well enough, or maybe it was a software bug, who knows, right? But when I look at the collision repair industry, I mean, we all know that, I would say data flows fairly freely. There's the EMS format that the IP systems spit out, which are heavily used by a number of different companies in the ecosystem, and those are all valuable players of that ecosystem. They depend on that data to provide a variety of services that kind of keep feeding that ecosystem. But let's face it, these so-called EMS files are essentially, they're DBase4 files or something, so essentially you can probably use Word to open it up and check it out. And it contains very sensitive information. If I'm not mistaken, all the way down to the VIN level. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. There have been initiatives to try to sort of secure that a little bit or significantly, but to date, that there hasn't been a huge appetite yet to really clamp down on it. But I think that's just a matter of time.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, and I guess I would think of it in terms of two categories: security and privacy. I mean, there's the security of the data and the security of the systems, and I think obviously that's one set of concerns. The whole idea of being able to hack into a system and obtain information that you're not supposed to get. The other issue, the other side of the coin, is privacy. Who has the right to do what with the data? And I think that's still TBD. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, just consider your cell phone and the apps that you have on that. I mean, there's no, the U.S. doesn't really have the equivalent of a GDPR. And so it's really, this is all new territory, I think. And I think that applies across, all sources of data. I will say, I mean, from my experience, I do think that and I deal with OEs and I deal with insurance companies, I do think that, these are organizations that are very, very sensitive to privacy concerns and are always thinking, and at least from all the discussions that I've had, are always thinking about, what would the customer think and what does, what's the customer's interest here. And I think, part of it is because they, these are companies that, in a sense, establish a relationship with their customer, right? So, they know that they have to, treat that very carefully. So on the one hand, I don't know that the regulatory system has caught up, with the privacy issues, which is a separate thing from security. But I do think that a lot of the entities involved recognize the level of care that they have to put into this. And at least from what I've seen, they are, very, very thoughtful about it. So hopefully that will continue. And I think some of this is also emerging as best practices, right? I mean, the Automobile Alliance has come out with their own, best practices, around privacy. And I think they're being very proactive about it. So again, there's no overarching regulation here. I do think that the parties who are stewards of the data recognize their responsibilities and, are generally trying to do the right thing. But I would also separate, security versus privacy because they're two related but separate topics.
So, keeping on the construct of data, wow, look at this. All these questions are about data, different than the questions previously. Look at that. Yeah, I know.
Oh, boy.
I'm going to have to sing the entire version of Old Country Road, the entire version to keep us active here. Okay, question, and it's an open question. How do shops and consumers get their hands on telematics data that is sent to insurers, OEM, or another party? knowing that the telematics data is different than scan data, I mean, it's much more rich potentially. So, question I guess really is how do shops get it? Number one. The second one would be how do consumers get it? And I think now you raised GDPR, so I will ask, maybe you know, what rights do consumers have to the data that was sent from their car? So if we argue about privacy and the whole transparency aspect, that's great. How does a consumer now say, give me what was sent from my car to whatever the endpoint was? Anyone have any thoughts on that or inputs?
So I think from our perspective, well, so this is where today these are isolated use cases where a consumer, if we take, let's just say, usage-based insurance as an example, and I'll get to the shops in a second, but with those, so you have isolated, very specific use cases where the consumer opts into doing exactly one thing with the data, but it's not. They don't have the method to freely say, to call the car company and say, I need you to do these 25 things with my data. That is getting better though, when you think about BMW, to quote one, they recently announced about a year ago an initiative called Car Data, which is a repository for all of the data about the vehicle, including pretty much everything we talked about. And BMW essentially established a platform, and if any actor, external actor would like to access that information, they can send a request. There's a mechanism where they can, let's say you want to write an app, to, I don't know, open the doors of the car or something. You essentially, as an app provider, you would go to BMW, submit the request, and they would then, float that to their drivers and say, hey, there's this app, if you have it or you want it, here's the kind of data that it's going to use, and and then they also have the consumer also has the ability to ask for that data to be deleted. So this platform was developed in agreement with the GDPR regulations and whatnot, or with that specific, with the GDPR in mind. So I think we're going to see more and more of those mechanisms of sort of, instead of just treating it all as one big blob of data that's just sitting there, to really start segmenting in these databases that contain the vehicle data, the driver's data, and to really segment out different use cases that are permissible with that data. So the way we look at it now, when we look at the shops, we work on, we obviously, our software is tightly integrated. It's one cloud, as I mentioned earlier, that connects insurers, it connects shops and the car companies. So you could take a scenario like scan codes. If you were to scan the vehicle data, and that data can then, could freely flow into the shop software, where it can be used to, to file a claim, or to get reimbursed, to, fix the car. So I think we're going to see these kind of scenarios. I think they're coming. They're actually not that far out, as long as the foundation, which is the data, becomes available. That's, I think, what we're all waiting for today.
Anyone else?
Well, for us, we own a lot of cars, and I will tell you our experience so far is it's very difficult to get access to the data just from those cars themselves. And so I think there's just a lot of work that's got to be. I don't think we've figured out what the mechanisms really should be and what kind of standards should be in place to abide by to make it work for folks and to keep the ecosystems open and reasonably free. I mean, again, security is a whole nother topic, but just that this kind of gets into that control aspect that we talked about before.
How about you, Nikki? Anything?
I know that the telematics team won't tell me anything.
Okay.
Anytime anyone internally is asked for any kind of data to support, one initiative or the other, it's locked down. What they would do with it in this case, I'm not really sure. I think Andreas summed it up pretty well.
So it sounds like there's work for us to do to do well. Basically, just think about it, right? Tim Cook from Apple, what was it about a month ago? Now posited for the world, right? Any Apple owner can contact Apple, get all data that has ever been transmitted or understood by their device, and get a copy of it, and then choose to pick and choose what gets kept or deleted by Apple. I think that's probably a place that we're going to have to move to over time in the automotive space, you think?
Yeah, I think all of this technology is really outpacing the time it takes to really think these things through and vet them out. And it's great that this technology is here and there's a lot of good things we can do with it, but we kind of all have to take a step and really think about the implications and what could be the pros and the cons. And I think everything's moving so quickly, you know, now we're kind of playing catch up on what do we do with it now.
I mean, I think, I would just add, and I agree, I think, with all the panelists. I mean, from what I've seen, I think the EU is probably further advanced in terms of setting the framework to be able to disseminate connected car information because, as Andreas mentioned, you know, BMW, created their car data platform in anticipation of GDPR. But now the automotive alliances in the EU are positing the idea of creating so-called neutral servers, which is sort of like the car data platform that BMW has. But the idea being that the automakers need to make this information available to other parties when the consumer wants services from these other parties. So I think in the EU there's a lot more regulatory pressure building towards this. I don't think that set of circumstances exists here in the States. And so what you have is a much more ad hoc kind of scattershot approach.
So that actually leads into this next question, and it really is actually for any of you. It's really for any of you. So we've talked about there's a lot of value in being connected, and there's huge opportunities in being connected. So given that, do we anticipate a world where we might see retrofit connectivity being made available? So we are at SEMA, the aftermarket collision repair, right? There's a reason why we're all here. People touch vehicles, they update vehicles. Could we see a world outside of dongles, right, Andreas, where we actually do retrofit kits to bring connectivity to cars in the fleet that were made previous to or made without being connected previously? Anyone see a world where we do bring kits, or is it just a world of dongles and limited sort of connections that way?
I mean, I don't really see. I mean, there's always going to be aftermarket solutions that offer specific features. Dongle is the best example. I'm having a hard time envisioning a connectivity kit that does the following, because in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, okay, so if I had the ability to put a modem into that car after the fact, all right, what kind of data do I want to transmit, right? So I got to clip into the bus somewhere to actually get to that data if it's diagnostic data or, so that's going to be a little complex. Then you got to most likely, you want to do something other than just diagnostic data as a consumer with that, right? So there's got to be a use case that is going to further adoption and further actually usage of this, right? So otherwise, why spend the money? So then I asked myself the question, well, it'd be kind of cool if you can add something to the head unit, maybe to integrate it with some of the onboard functionalities, so you see something on a screen or have some particular features, but that gets really complex because now you don't really have access, the aftermarket doesn't have access to the proprietary infotainment platform code that the OEMs have. So, all right, so there your options are limited. So I'm struggling to see a scenario where that's realistic, where somebody's going to pay money to get this installed. Somebody's going to pay money to flip the bill on a monthly basis. When frankly, most people are using their cell phones anyways, using CarPlay or Android Auto or neither, and just kind of have the phone in the ashtray. And they can get most of the features that they need, right? So I think that's a whole nother thing for the car industry as a whole, grappling with how do we keep the guys out of Silicon Valley at bay while still offering something valuable and get that, make sure their proprietary software is adopted. So I'm skeptical.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think from what we've seen technically is really it's just the architecture of the cars themselves and the electronic systems, how the networks that support the sensors are put together just aren't evolved to a point where you could support aftermarket. It could be an interesting world and bring in new forms of competition and connected services and things if it could evolve. But it's just not in a place that would support that today. And we've even seen some of the OEMs struggle themselves as they add connected platforms into the vehicle and then being able to pull data elements that they do have the proprietary codes for and should be able to. It's just, it's in a very early stages of evolution today.
Yeah, I think telematics is a big word. So if we're talking about something that would mirror CarPlay, that's telematics. But when we talk about crash reporting and that sort of thing, that's all, the vehicle is built with all of that in mind. So the wiring harnesses are wired a certain way to hold a certain amount of voltage and whatnot all over the car. And then when you start adding these things around, can we ensure the integrity of the vehicle when we do that? I don't know that Subaru would want to say 100% that car now is as good as the model that was built to support that. That said, telematics is also software updates. So, as we get better and better with over-the-air updates, can we go from a Gen 1 to a Gen 4 with limited integration as far as anything that needs a sensor? That's probably realistic. Our eyesight system gets smarter and smarter with every iteration. Could we upload that software and make it smarter, even if it's a earlier model car? Theoretically, if it's built that way from the start, yeah, probably. But when we start talking about sensors and getting the kind of data that collision centers need, I'm not sure retrofitting makes sense.
Go, Drake. Yeah, you got it, sure? All right. Country road, take me home. I know, it's such an emotional topic. It chokes you up, doesn't it? Chokes you up.
I really love cars.
You really love cars. Oh, no, Nikki. All right, you okay? Okay. Anyone else want to wait? You want? No? No?
No, I mean, I'll just echo. I mean, I think, sorry. So, I think that there's been a lot of thought by different parties around retrofitting cars, but, the retrofit, I don't think anybody's ever been able to figure out the economics of it. I think that's the main hurdle.
So, here we go. Good question. And, Nikki, I think this one's going to be for you. So, question is, will any information, telematics specifically, still be transmitted if a customer stops paying for the wireless bill? Stops paying for the wireless bill. So a lot of car companies, I'm not going to have a subscription period, right? Buy the car, 5 years coverage, so it's just like your drivetrain warranty, et cetera. And then afterwards, it's up to the customer. I don't know what Subaru's policy is, so you can limit yourself to Subaru, but in your world, if the customer chooses to not extend, if that is an option, what happens, given what we've just talked about here in terms of the value of data, in terms of making the customer experience good, the repair proper, and the vehicle safe?
I think that's twofold. I think part of the agreement and the contract that we have with the customer is once they end service, that's the end. We stop collecting data. That's privacy. That's the agreement. So that's the legal side of it. I think as telematics grows and matures, though, I think customers will see the added value in continuing that subscription. So today we have navigation and we have the Starlink safety and security package where someone will come on if they hear the ACN or whatnot. But as we roll more things out, as we can do more with the car, I think there will be more value for that. So when OnStar started this years and years ago, we haven't really progressed as far as what we can do with that. But I think the pace is going to be changing quickly now, where we can do a lot more, where we can integrate collision centers and retailers and insurance carriers and whomever else. I think this will add value to the customer. So I think it will be kind of a mainstay thing that they just have it on their car and they pay the subscription, and their kids can do Wi-Fi in the back and watch movies, and they can order pizza on their way in, and it's just going to become mainstay, like the same way that like when you had your flip phone cell phone and you could like make phone calls with it, and that was great. But it stayed in your pocket a lot, and now you have a smartphone and you're walking into fountains at the mall because you're so distracted by this device. I think that's how this is going to go. I think right now the subscription is limited, genuinely, and as we can do more, we'll do more.
But we're not going to be crashing our cars into the fountains because we're looking at the screen,
because we're
right?
going to have the
No?
safety and security of Subaru eyesight.
Okay. So I was just checking. Okay. All right.
There's another dynamic to that is I think people tend to keep their cars longer, or they're at least in service longer than some of the cellular technologies that are supporting the connectivity today. And so I think we will reach a point where at some point an 8-year-old car maybe can't even connect anymore because the cellular networks have advanced beyond that technical capability. So we're going to have some interesting obsolescent issues with this vehicle technology, and especially as we learn more about ADAS systems and we learn more about the sensor systems, and those are physical electronics in most cases that you can't just fix with a software update. So we have some interesting times ahead of us as we evolve the technology and we become dissatisfied with the stuff that we're producing today versus what we produce 10 years from now.
I think I would just add to that. One of the things I think that the automakers are looking at are different levels of service. I think everybody's familiar with the safety and security packages that automakers offer, but I think because look, wireless is getting cheaper and cheaper, and a lot of the technology that's going into these systems is getting cheaper and cheaper. I mean, to the point where sensor technology, wireless technology is getting so cheap, it's being put into what's now being called smart devices. I mean, anything and everything from light bulbs to toasters and stuff, right? So I think what automakers are looking at is they're looking beyond the safety and security package, and what other services value-added services can be delivered to maintain that relationship over a period of time. I think that's what they're thinking very deeply about.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you look at it, I think it's fair to say that subscription services in the automotive industry have been highly unsuccessful. It's just name one program that has really retained customers significantly after some introductory period, right? So I always chuckle when I read analysts, depending on the analyst report you see out there about, oh, there's so many connected cars, but when you really do the math, a lot of them are counting modems. Well, a modem alone, I can name 5 car manufacturers where after 6 months the trial period is expired, so that modem is useless. Right, so I think I agree with you, Jim. I think the industry is learning from that. I think the car companies are seeing, oh, this is a real problem, right? We have a lot of these things that we want to do in the future, some of the ones that we talked about here, but we can only do that if there's an active connection. Consumers have proven over the last decade that they're not really willing to pay for yet another monthly fee. So what do you do? That a lot of them try to, I then hear the conversation about, well, we can invent all kinds of new cool stuff to make it more attractive and they'll come. I don't know, I haven't seen those things yet, right? So I actually think what's more likely to happen, or what really needs to happen for this to all work out is, and I know you're not gonna like that, Nikki, I think you're gonna have to bundle it in. I just don't think there's a way around it, right? And it's, as Jim said, prices are coming down, right? So it's going to make it easier or more palatable to a car company, but I just don't see these kind of numbers that are being projected out there in terms of connected cars. I don't see them coming together if the OEMs don't make a fundamental determination to kind of bundle the stuff in and let it run. It doesn't have to be forever. Be 5 years, 10 years, whatever. They're going to vary a little bit, but probably more than 6 months.
So this question is for Andreas and Jim. question. Are you getting your information from the manufacturer or compiled through current services? Meaning specifically, are you getting it at the time of the accident, such as OnStar gets, where it comes immediately, or do you get it post some duration of time later that it comes courtesy of the OEM or some other third-party service? Either one of you.
So
Oh,
for us to-
you both have to answer. So one of you just go first.
No, we get the data real time.
Real time.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually both. We get information, from the OEM and also from the insurer after the fact. So it's actually both.
Okay, so then that brings up another question. Will it be the case that we will begin to see this data directly impacting where and how vehicles get repaired? So the question, the specific question, I won't read it out, but the heart and theme of it goes to, do we see a world where you all, as you're getting this data, can instantaneously begin to direct where that vehicle goes to be serviced and to be repaired? And if the answer to that question is yes, there is a follow-on. If the answer to the question is no, there's also a follow-on. So either way, you're getting a follow-on. Who wants to go first? I guess he's passing to you.
Okay,
well,
me.
yeah, either one of you. Okay, yeah, okay, we'll go to
Okay,
Nikki.
me.
Yeah, woohoo. Do you need a glass of water?
I know.
You're all choked up.
I'm like
This is going to be a love answer, okay?
I'm like the scary one to talk to now,
Okay.
right?
There's no scare. This is all love. This is all open room.
I think, yes, we would like to make sure that the cars are going to collision centers that are going to do safe and proper repair. I think we want our customers taken care of the best that they possibly can. And if that is having them go to a certified collision center that is within our network, that we're monitoring and auditing and making sure that they're doing the right thing so that that car is safe, then that's what we would do.
Go ahead. No, yeah.
I think what in the world today, I mean, typically a lot of times what happens is, there's an accident, and so then the municipal tow comes, right? And so then, and it all depends, on where it happens and, whether or not they may have services that involve towing. So who gets the tow? I mean, I think that's today, that can be up in the air, right? And so in a lot of instances, what happens is, it's a municipal tow. And then it's a question of, depending on who services the vehicle and whether, the insurer gets involved, does it get retowed, does it go to another shop? So I think, it's a really good question. I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer just because there are so many different parties involved today and sorting through all of and I don't think anybody has figured out sorting through all these different parties. So I think, I would envision the status quo continuing for some time. But I do think that there's a larger trend and this gets to, the safety and security, that Nikki's talking about, is just the fact that, vehicles are now such complex systems and they're precision engineered and so on and so forth, that I think all of the parties, the automakers, the repair shops, the insurers, all recognize the need for having really skilled, competent people working on these repairs. So I mean, the bad news is, I think, the struggle over, where does the car get towed or retowed again, and then ultimately get repaired. I think that's getting sorted through. I do think that in general, all the parties are recognizing, the real importance of having very skilled folks work on the cars and using precision parts. So, I mean, I think it's an evolving space. No easy answer to the question.
Yeah, same. I agree. I think I think the answer is yes. I think we'll get there, but it's going to take time. It's going to be an iterative process. There's going to be ultimately a lot of these decisions. So some of the things I hear is some car companies, they want to get their own tow involved. Some of them say, "Why am I going to pay for the tow if I can have the insurance company pay for it?" So they're going to follow different philosophies. And I think we as systems providers need to make sure that we can support all of those. Other parts of the decision are going to be the consumer themselves. What do they want to do, right? Do they want to file a claim, actually? It would be good to know, is it worth me calling my insurer that actually was this, higher than my deductible or lower than my deductible? Am I just going to waste my time? So I think, but I think it will happen. I think that we will see things like, today we live in a world where it's primarily the DRP essentially driving a lot of this. In the future, so for instance, if you're going to take a car to repair, you call your insurer, they tell you, okay, here's the shops you can take it to or that are part of my network. The consumer makes a choice and get their car repaired. In the future, you have the car company, quote unquote, with some ownership stake in the consumer, in the driver, because the car is telematics enabled. They actually find out when the accident happens. They can reach out to it. They can now control that experience. They're probably going to say, I don't know. I think you're going to look for a certified shop. I think you might say, well, why don't we find a shop that is both in the DRP and certified? That might be sort of the Venn diagram, if you will. I think that's going to be some of this evolution. It's just like everything. It's not going to be a big bang thing that tomorrow we're going to wake up and all this stuff is going to happen automatically. This is going to progress over time. Same thing with predicting what parts may have been impacted, right? So it'd be actually great to communicate to the shop, hey, you're getting this vehicle's coming in. Here's some of the parts you're going to need, right? So there's a lot we can do that is on the roadmap.
Any other last thoughts? Okay. So, Nikki, this is for you, and it follows on this conversation we were just having. And you can feel free to tell me that we don't answer it. Okay. Will the Certified Subaru program allow an independent shop to be part of the program if a local Subaru dealer already is?
Yes. That's an easy one to answer, actually.
Go for it. Keep going.
So we have a little over 600 retailers across the U.S., and of that, we think we have maybe at best a third that have collision centers. That's not nearly enough to cover the UIO in this country. So we're really going to have to depend pretty heavily, actually, on independent collision centers. And we've met with many of you, and they're brilliant centers. I mean, you guys are doing the right things, beautiful shops, up-to-date equipment. You guys know your business really well, especially, I would imagine, the people in this room are particularly engaged in their business. So we're very happy to be speaking with the independents and having them come on board and join the family.
So then the follow-on question is, do the independents need to be sponsored by a dealer to be considered for the program?
No. And that was a very intentional decision. We don't want anything getting in the way of a hand raiser. If there is enough UIO, we have an algorithm that we're using to just make sure that everybody gets the business to make it worth being a certified collision center on the program. But as long as there's enough UIO to go around, we want anyone who wants to raise their hand and join to join. We don't want any kind of, leverage or deals with other people, or we want the best people on this initiative, and then that, full stop. If you are committed to becoming certified, our parameters are relatively stringent, but if you're willing to join, we're happy to have you.
Excellent. Okay. Keep your questions coming. We still have time left. I'm going to be going through, if some of these are somewhat repetitive in case I'm going to summarize them, so please do keep coming with your questions. This is for everybody. Feel free to jump in or take a pass. While data is excellent to have, and the more we can have, the better, actually predictability of the future is probably the greatest challenge. So while we have all this data, the ability to actually predict the future based on this is going to be one of the biggest challenges. So the question to each of you is, from your respective position, what is or are the biggest concerns about that? So is it incorrect or corrupt data? Is it a mismatch, i.e. too much time has happened between when that thing happened and where I'm at right now? I mean, do you have a concern? And if so, what are we trying to do to address that concern? Anyone can jump in here. Or I am singing.
Uh-oh.
Jump in.
Please
Yeah, please
not
jump.
that.
Yeah, please jump in.
So that is a really good question because there are variations in the data, from sensor to sensor, TCU to TCU, and OEM and whatnot. So I mean, it is a real concern that we address in what we do. We actually have an entire data science team. And part of what they do is develop the algorithms to normalize the data. I mean, we've actually got enough data that we know what it should look like, what the distribution should be. And so we can actually work with, partners, the OEM partners or TSPs or, whomever is actually collecting the data. We can actually work with them to normalize the data so that it looks the same to the entities that are consuming the data, so that they have assurance that the data is meeting a certain quality. But it's a very good question.
I only like to think I ask good questions, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, excellent. Anyone else?
But for us, we have a very diverse fleet, so we have hundreds of makes and models, and so making sense of it across which then anyone that's tracking it from an insurance standpoint and repair standpoint, you have so many different ones to deal with, and right now the data comes in so many different ways, and it's labeled differently, it's measured differently. You get which it makes it very difficult to capitalize on that promise and the potential of being able to use that in the future. So I think finding a way to standardize some of that, or at least make it more consistent, and measuring the same kinds of things would go a long ways towards setting us down the path.
So to that point, is there any work being done to do that? And if so, is there a place for the repair industry to weigh in?
I think the best work that I see is in the SAE work with the automotive engineers, but that's a really slow process, and the technology is evolving so quickly that it seems like a cycle that's never going to complete. Well, it'll never complete, but it's just not even going to get into a reasonable catch-up mode. So I think it's going to take more partnerships with people agreeing together that, hey, we're going to use these data elements in ways, and here's what the value they can provide. So then how do we do this in a way that helps us realize that potential sooner rather than later? And it's going to take people working together, more than creating, little separate networks by themselves and their own little ecosystems to manage and control. It is my last analogy on that would be, think about text messaging, right? So in the early days, when we had these two-way text message pagers, right? And they would only work with somebody else that had one of the same kind of pager. And then it evolved to where you could text message somebody. If you were an AT&T customer, you could text message another AT&T customer. But you couldn't exchange that data across networks until eventually folks got together and decided, hey, it would be a good idea to just let's define this as a common message service, and we can all then contact each other, and we don't have to care who your provider is. So if we could get to that point in this industry with telematics and connected car data, that would be huge.
You do know that within at least one OEM, they have 10 different steering wheel sizes. Like, you do know that, right? We got a long way to go. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. Okay. All right. We're going back to the certified repair space.
All right, this stuff I know about. So okay.
All right, question. We are talking about an incredible amount of data that will give insight into how to fix, how to repair, how to restore a vehicle. And so the question is all of the data, as today anticipated by Subaru, is it going to be available to repairers generically, or only certified repairers, or only Subaru branded repairers?
Oh boy, this is like looking into the crystal ball because we're so far away from being able to even use this data for that.
If you had to take a guess.
If I had to take a guess, I think it would be similar to our STIS, where you could rent, buy, license the repair procedures, or there will probably be companies like AllData that have repair procedures. But I think it would be right to repair, right? I mean, I'm new to this industry, but it seems like that would probably fall under right to repair.
So I'm going to, on behalf of the questioner, I'll give you this card afterwards to take back to Subaru, because one of the questions is really specifically is like, because there is stuff that would happen that would be transmitted telematically,
Right.
that would not be available afterwards. For example, at the time of crash, how many occupants were all to understand the state of vehicle, so that could help to understand what was potentially going on. So I'll keep this to the side for.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I don't think we've ever really thought about it, so it's something to think about.
Yep, so I'll keep this for you to take back. Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go. Privacy and security in the connected car network. All right, here we go. Question, to the greatest extent possible, please share what is being done to prevent hacking into the connected car. As we evolve the ADAS system, as we begin to see the ability to not just pull data, but to push data and to be able to start to effectuate control. Can anyone begin to weigh in on where we are and what we're doing in terms of protecting against that vision and view? What was it in Fast and Furious 7, right, where all the cars were taking them? Yeah. How are we stopping that from happening or ensuring that that's not our future?
Well, as an IT guy, this is a hot topic for me because I don't think nearly enough is being done in the space around this. And it has to do with how the cars have evolved and how their bus networks have evolved. And it's the best technology that the 1970s had to offer. And so we keep adding things
You got
onto
a
that.
funny from the audience. You should say thank you. Yeah, thank you. There you go. All
Everybody
right, keep
laughs
on,
at me.
there you go.
Yeah, so we keep cobbling things onto it and adding some very advanced technology now with these sensors and these ADAS systems. LiDAR, radar, all of that has vast more amounts of data traversing the bus, but we're just making it work at this point. We're not putting in place the kinds of technology to make it work securely, and where we're thinking about protecting that data as much as we are transmitting it between, even just inside the internal systems of the car itself. And so as you add that connectivity piece to it, I don't think we have enough expertise in the industry focused on how do we secure that properly? How do we create the right kinds of separations between systems without just saying, well, we got to close the car and it's got to be an OEM only network, because that's kind of a cop-out trying to do security through obscurity or just building a perimeter around the outside of it. But if anybody cracks that perimeter, then that car could be theoretically controlled by anyone external. And we've seen hackers demonstrate that. But it's because it's not built from the ground up as a secure network and a secure architecture. And we've got to start taking that much more seriously.
Anyone else want to weigh in or comment?
So I'm not an IT guy, but what I sort of hear in the OEM circles and supplier circles is, I think the car companies are trying very hard in two ways, right? And that's been evolving, and it's I see a lot more effort over in recent years. I think number one, when you think about, I don't know, when was it, 2 years ago that FCA car got hacked with the Conti unit?
July of 15.
Okay, well, and there was sort of there was this uproar, right? FCA was went on the record. visibly upset that somebody would, even though they didn't have any bad intentions, it was kind of a, just a test, that they kind of publicized it, and why would you do that? I think nowadays, when you look at what a lot of the car companies are doing, they're essentially inviting people into dedicated programs that they have to find flaws in the vehicles, and that's a great thing, right? Pay people to try to hack your car. Get the best hackers you can get to try to get into the car. Pay them for their work, and it's a crowdsourcing type of approach, if you will, that I think is very smart, and I don't know if FCA has embraced that, but I think they should all do that. The other thing is, so I've worked in the connected car space for the last 7 or 8 years, and one of the things I've seen always on the supplier side to the car companies, and what I've seen in terms of the contracts, the bar has been raised significantly. So where there used to be sort of a few little sections around security, no big deal. Nowadays, that's one of the central aspects, and if you don't have a dedicated security IT department and all that, and the right infrastructure certifications, you can't be a supplier, right? So I think they're trying to look at it bottoms up, top down. Can they be doing more? Sure, it all costs money, right? So I'm sure they're kind of looking at the coin and figuring out, okay, what do we want to allocate these expenses to? But I do see a lot more being done. Sort of subjective, view.
Okay, so for the unfortunately you didn't put your name on here. So whoever asked that, if you are interested, you can certainly come up afterwards. We can give you a bit more detail. But if you are not aware, actually every year here in Vegas in the July timeframe is DEF CON, which is the hackers convention. And this is where Chris and Charlie actually exposed the FCA hack in 2015. But they have what's called the Automotive Village, and they actively are penetrating and showing penetration of vehicles. So they'll do 18-wheel rigs down to cars, electric, and others. So if you're interested, you can go online and find out. They publish all their papers, they publish research, the videos, et cetera. But it's DEF CON, DEFCON. And if you want more information, feel free to stop afterwards, and we'll certainly give that to you. Okay, let's continue on. Where is my question here? Yes, perfect. And I think this is going to go to Andreas and Jim. What's the adoption rate of insurer apps for crash detection and electronic first notice of loss among the usage-based and non-usage-based policyholders? Give a percentage of uptake or a percentage of penetration or some level, into the mic, yeah, some level of that?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's early days. Insurers, I think, have cycled through a number of different ways of data collection. They experimented with, aftermarket hardware. Probably the best known is Progressive Snapshot. A lot of insurers are now, pursuing smartphone options, and the algorithms behind the smartphone, solutions are getting better and better at detecting crashes, but there are still error rates and whatnot. So I think it depends on the type of solution. But in any event, it's still very early days. The adoption rate, I think, is very, very low. I wouldn't even hazard to guess, what it is. I think it depends on what solution the insurer is using, whether it's a smartphone solution or not, or whether it's a connected car solution. And in both cases, it really is very early days. So, and part of it is just the fact that it's a relatively new use case. And so, both, the smartphone app providers, the OEMs, the insurers are all trying to figure out how best to incorporate this. First of all, get reliable information, and then, how to handle and process the information. So I think it's still very early days. and the number of consumers who are actually getting services through this is still relatively small.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm not actually aware, other than pilots or trials, I'm not aware of any OEM-driven EFNOL solutions that are out there. I think insurers have some out there. We power some of them, but it's I think from an adoption perspective, it's very early days. They really just started to hit the road in the last year or so.
Will you, Mr. Derik Reiser, will you be personally investing in the automotive collision repair block data token? Will you be playing blockchain token? Will you be investing in that? I'm kidding. The real question is, will you as a company, will Enterprise, be investing in the automotive blockchain?
Yeah, so we've had some very early conversations about blockchain and how that could fit into the ecosystem. There's a lot of potential. Again, this is another technology with a ton of potential, right? And I think, I tend to think of it in terms of what cloud computing was like in 2004. That some of the very early folks that had use cases that matched up with us, like a Netflix, for example, and Amazon, the only way they could do what they needed to do was by using this new cloud computing platform. But we all saw the potential at the time that, hey, this could just change how everybody does computing, and this is how everybody hosts their services. And it's kind of followed along that way. So I think the blockchain, what's exciting about it is that it's a way for a lot of folks to participate together and on transactions together, that's what this is all about, right? So if you have a car that needs repaired and you have an insurance company that's going to pay for that, and you have somebody that's getting a loan or rental, in the meantime, those are all things that you could tie together to a set of events that you all agree upon, that when these conditions are met, then the next thing happens in the chain. And there's a lot of potential for that, but I think we could be years and years away from being able to leverage that. But it does open up the door for a lot of parties to be able to work together, but have trust in that the transactions are executing as agreed upon.
Andreas, Jim, either one of you guys want to weigh in on automotive collision repair blockchain?
Yeah, the only thing honestly, I think Derik probably would know far more than I would. I mean, I do know that Verisk is looking at blockchain technology. I know that insurers are looking at blockchain technology, but at what point it becomes widely adopted, I couldn't say.
Yeah, so the way I look at it, so what's the use case, right? So I think I could see it starting with the car company, right? If a car company were to define every part in a car through a blockchain, right, and then be able to give the industry, allow their ecosystem participants to add or enter information into the blockchain, right? So, okay, car comes in for repair, you're gonna, I don't know, you're gonna take the airbag out, or you're, replacing some parts. Every part gets, essentially leads to an update in the blockchain, so you have a secure mechanism to really trace what happened with that vehicle all the way from the time it was built, all the way to when it's gone, right? So I think there's some cool stuff you can do with it. We're looking at it from an R&D perspective. We're having some conversation with car companies, but I think this is the kind of thing where the car companies really need to start that dialogue, right? There's no point for any of us that are sitting in the value chain to come up with some cool blockchain thing and then find out the car company wants to have their own blockchain, and it's kind of backwards if folks that sit later on in the ecosystem or in the life cycle of the vehicle, start defining things that require that the vehicle itself needs to be put into the blockchain, right? So I haven't. I don't think there's a particular rush to get that solved.
All right. So you stand between this audience and the bar. With
Let's
that,
go.
With that, yeah. We are done, but we're going to send them off with one last question. All right? The question is, what preparation might be necessary for the repair industry to actually participate in telematics? Like, what can they do as they walk away from this show today? What can they do? What are recommendations that you have for them, especially if, as a repairer, they are in the independent repair business? Do you want to start? I'd love you to start, Nikki.
Okay, great. I think being up to date with your technology is going to be really important. So making sure that you have the right solutions from estimating and making sure that you are just the technology in collision repair centers are very vast. I mean, no one's really banging on fenders anymore, but there's a lot of gray area there too. If you're still using a dial-up modem, maybe stop doing that. I've seen a lot of tablet-based solutions where you can do your estimates and everything, your walk around and all of that from a tablet. I imagine the more familiar you are with that kind of technology, the easier it'll be for you to integrate whatever that telematics solution is into your day-to-day business. There's lots of really cool software that we have looked through and vetted for a lot of different things. And by far the hardest thing to do is to get people to use it. So making sure everyone in your collision center is happy to embrace new technology, that'll just make things a lot easier when it does come to fruition.
Trained, up to date, don't use dial-up modems.
Yeah, please stop that.
Okay, okay, good.
Definitely stop that.
Okay, perfect. Jim?
Well, first of all, I think everything that Nikki said, I agree
So Nikki
with.
plus,
Nikki plus some Jim advice. So I guess two things that come to mind. One is just being technology ready, and having up-to-date systems. And I think the other, and more, I just see this in across industries, is everything is moving to the cloud. Everything is moving to the cloud for a lot of different reasons. And so I think having your infrastructure up to date so that you can take advantage of this, because I think the telematics services are all going to be cloud-based. So having your infrastructure and the bandwidth and your telecom all up to date to be able to take advantage of this, I think is critical, because this really is becoming, this is truly the proverbial big data. It's massive. So, and it's only really going to happen in the cloud, in my opinion.
so stop using dial-up modems, stop using fax. Is that what we're going to
Yes,
do?
that's
Okay,
right.
all right. How about you?
Well, I think you start thinking now about how you would use the data and what you could do to streamline your processes to be a better, to service vehicles quicker, better, safer. And so what would you do to impact your processes? And then what data you're missing and elements to allow you to then meet. I think I heard Nikki talked about key performance indicators as a differentiator, right? Yeah. So as we have this data flowing through, think about how you can show that you're doing the best you possibly can for the repair of these vehicles, and enable yourselves to streamline your processes. Think about how you can use this data to better do what you do, and so that way you show up at the top of the list with everyone, whether it's an insurance company or an OEM, to get that call first.
Excellent. And Andreas, want to bring it home? What should they do to prepare themselves?
I'll keep it short and sweet.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen.
Stay close to your network partners that you need, the actors in your ecosystem, and then find the right platform provider, the right technology provider that's going to bring those pieces of the network to you, so you can participate in the telematics.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not dismissing you yet, but I do want you to please join me in giving a round of applause to Andreas, Derik, James, and Nikki. So Your information message as you begin to part ways and go off tonight is on behalf of SCRS, Aaron Schulenberg, the Executive Director, and Kai, current Chairperson, is to say thank you. Thank you for your continued interest and participation in advancing in the art of repair and then the science of repair and making it a science. And number two is thank you for your participation this afternoon. If you want to hear some more cool and exciting stuff, there's some rapid fire technology and conversations. We invite you to come back here tomorrow, same location, here tomorrow, 10 a.m. on this stage, a TED-style type presentation, 10 minutes, rapid fire, on far-ranging topics from AI, car repair, aviation, etc. So back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. But for now, you are dismissed. Thank you so very much and have yourself an enjoyable rest of the show. Take care.